Plan.
All right. It shows recording on my end. Did it give you a notification that it's recording?
Give me that notification. Yep. I think we're good.
Yes. Awesome. It's working. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Nerds and Friends podcast. I'm Josh Lindquist, and I have my astute co host, Carey DuVal, here.
I'm Carey DuVal, and I am here.
Awesome. And we will have more guests joining us shortly. But in the meantime, let's get into it. We're talking about Protagonists today.
Excellent.
Yes.
Protagonists, that awesome core of your story that maybe doesn't have to be somebody you like, but definitely has to be somebody relatable in a way.
Yes. And rooting for them for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So that's in a new screenplay I'm writing. I'm currently working on two screenplays. One is with Chad Gloria, who is unable to be here today, but we've got a cool noir thing going on that we're working on. And we've been kind of ironing out how to have him be a troubled detective, but not be alienating to the audience because he's kind of an abrupt asshole, because he can't sleep is kind of the shtick that we're going with. So he's like constantly tripping out because he's on sleep deprived.
Okay,
So
awesome.
yeah, so that's fun. But we had to make him relatable and make him so he's not just a hard boiled detective with a grudge out.
Mm-hmm.
So for the other screenplay I'm working on, I have a character who is religious, which I am not. So my protagonist kind of finds God, and that spurs her on to her quest to do something about the homeless problem in LA. So trying to make her likable to the audience has been a challenge because I'm writing a character with different viewpoints and different ways of problem solving than my own. So it's been a challenge. So I'd love to hear what are some thoughts you have on that.
Well, that does sound interesting. Well, so the cool thing about your first screenplay, the one you're writing with Chad, as far as noir goes, is noir um, as a genre is so iconic, especially when you get down to the 30s stuff. I mean, and there's the hard bitten detective is in one way, shape, or form it's kind of a staple, and it can like the interesting thing about it is that it can be applied to so many different genres. And I'm stealing this directly from Robert Mckee because, like I was telling you before the podcast started, I just finished his most recent book on character, which was 15 hours long, an audiobook, but it was worth every penny.
Wow.
And every minute, because every chapter, like you had, he recommended it, but I still had to pause just about at the end of every chapter, like kind of sit and ruminate because of it. And the thing that he talks about with the noir detective that had never, like, it always been there subconsciously, but I never really thought about it was the detective is kind of our basis for the modern anti-hero, because it is someone who is not a cop and therefore can run with circles of criminals, and can also operate outside of the norms of the law. So you've actually like Deadpool, for all intents and purposes, could fall into that same archetype of like the noir style anti-hero, being specifically a renegade and independent. And the cool thing about that is you can make enormously flawed characters that are relatable for some reason. I mean, Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca is he's an alcoholic, and he's also very much an isolationist, but he's still very endearing because of what we learn about him throughout that movie.
Yep. Yeah, and that's kind of the chord we're striking with our character, is that he's lost his family and we're a little nebulous on how or what happens. So that's one way we build sympathy, and then he's trying to solve a murder. So that's automatically puts the audience on his side to some degree. But yeah, we're just working to find that line where he's a very flawed character, but you're also rooting for him. So it's been a fun challenge.
I dig that. I dig that a lot. What about so you actually have a bit of a religious background. How's uncovering that for your second screenplay going?
A little emotional, actually. It's a little bit interesting to delve into my old ways of thinking, and to me now they seem so flawed and so base and immature, and it's a little uncomfortable to confront that, because I used to be. You remember in college, I was a pretty diehard evangelical Christian, and now I'm an atheist, and so it's been a big change.
Well, so interesting thing about that is I don't think there's anything wrong with like making a character who does have those same kind of stumbling blocks as you. I mean, honestly, because that's what I'd watch. I mean, we when I was in Los Angeles last year, we watched Nightcrawler together,
Yeah.
and Jake Gyllenhaal's character, uh, I think it's Lewis Bloom, is a fucking repulsive character in a lot of ways. Like he's frightening in a lot of scenes, but he's still the protagonist because he's somebody who's adapting to a system that was already there. He's just the perfect person to operate in that system. So like even though you're sitting there and you're watching some stuff like that scene where Jake Gyllenhaal fucking busts a mirror while screaming at it is one of the like most frightening images in that movie because of the tension behind it. But you're also kind of like oh shit, I have an example for this. Lessons from the Screenplay is one of my favorite channels on YouTube, and
Okay.
the guy's name is Michael, who does this video, and I really recommend you looking up the video that he does comparing the movie Seven and the series True Detective.
Ooh, I
Because
love both those things.
well, both of them fit into the noir genre. To go back to your first screenplay to bounce around a little bit. But the cool thing that he talks about is how, so the main character in Seven is Morgan Freeman's character, who is jaded and also getting out of the police force. And arguably the main character in True Detective is Rust Cole, played by Matthew McConaughey, who is a nihilist who has been like completely jaded by the way that he's seen the darkest side of humanity, and he even comes out as an anti procreation. Like he's a very dark individual, and on the and the they're actually really supported by the other cast. So in Seven, so it's Woody Harrelson and Brad Pitt, who are on the more optimistic side of the spectrum than them. But Woody Harrelson and Brad Pitt's characters are also more optimistic. Like they've got like, but they're loose cannons. They've got a rage problem. And then it turns out that the character that is the most that is closer actually to Morgan Freeman or Russ Cole's philosophy is actually the villain.
I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, it was a fascinating breakdown. I was very much intrigued by it because it's the fact that that the villain is closer to the main character's ideals, but on the extreme end of that spectrum. Like like Thanos is taking the utilitarian argument to its absolute extreme. It's that same kind of concept, and it's that internal pull of this person is doing something that's reprehensible, but I do agree with their internal philosophy that incites that change in a character.
Well, that's going to help in my screenplay that I'm working on called Ministry, because the main character becomes very religious. She's re-embraced her relationship with God, but she's trying to do something about the homeless population. And so, not to give it all away, but she's going to start working to try to get churches to give up a bunch of their property to house the homeless. And she's going to get backlash from other religious people. So that kind of works out, like you were saying, where the people she's going to be coming up against have the same philosophy as her. They believe that they're doing the right thing for Jesus or whatever, and they're going to have that where they're refusing to give up property, and she's saying, "Well, isn't this more important to save souls at the end of the day?" So I'm kind of trying to show that argument of, hey, if you want to have churches, that's awesome, but you should use less space and house the homeless, because there's so many churches, especially around here, that have lots of land, whereas everything else in Los Angeles is very cramped and crowded. And it's like, in Finland and other European countries, they're finding that providing free housing then allows you to help people talk about addiction or mental health issues once they're in a safe place. And that's really how you tackle homelessness. Yeah, they're doing that in real life. And so implementing that in Los Angeles, if you say, well, there's a space issue, well, bullshit. There's all these churches that have all this unused property. There you go. And also, it's cheaper for taxpayers. Giving free services and free housing to a homeless person costs around $50,000 a year. to taxpayers, whereas the cost of law enforcement and medical bills and all the other associated costs from having someone homeless actually ends up being about $100,000, according to the most recent survey stats.
Well,
So,
and that's a fascinating angle to take, because it's not like that happened in Denver as well, where there was actually a Baptist church. Hey, Will.
hey,
We're
welcome, friend Will.
Talking about solving homelessness crisis, and the plunging neckline on our friend William is quite that's quite the look. It looks excellent. Framing your face well. Like Will's put in the work.
Yeah.
I think we might need to switch the tone of the podcast into something a little bit more like we're going to tell each other romantic horror stories now. So,
I mean,
yeah, I mean, is that a podcast market we can angle into here?
I'm sure we could. I mean, OnlyFans is a thing.
It is. We have an OnlyFans that's just us reading erotica.
Link below in the comments.
Link below in the comments to our OnlyFans, where we are variously deep voiced male protagonists in whatever you'd send for us to read.
Reading erotica in our underwear all day.
I mean, let's not get carried away. That's a big commitment.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah. Well, Will, just to catch you up, we're talking about protagonists in screenplays and novels as well, and kind of talking about how it's interesting to have a juxtaposition of villains and heroes that have similar philosophies, but are on the different side of the actual actions, and kind of how that interplay plays out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the example we were bringing up was I brought up a video from Lessons from the Screenplay about comparing Seven and True Detective. Why is it so hard for me to remember titles right now? But it talks about how the main characters have kind of a nihilistic philosophy, but they're on the side of the law, and the villains both also have a similarly nihilistic philosophy, but they are on the very extreme and very damaging end of that spectrum.
Yeah, that's always just that interesting juxtaposition where you get to and I think that just kind of works from a narrative standpoint, where you get to phrase the two sides of a very complex issue, and so the entire story gets to take place in the nuance there. I think especially with Seven, that's something that they just capitalize on really well, trying to just push that, how that nihilistic philosophy can just fall in both directions. And that ends up being kind of like the entire point of the antagonist story there.
Mm-hmm.
Of just, and it's very similar with like the Killing Joke, of how the Joker is just intent on showing how him and Batman are very similar, and that how anyone given a bad enough day would choose to do the evil thing and just murder a person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Warring philosophies are a really interesting way to go. I mean, to kind of draw an example of what I'm writing right now with Josh, I'm writing a screenplay called Last Man Out, which is kind of about special forces in the Middle East. And the big conflict is much less the external factors, and it's much more, you have a commander who's very much representative of the 20 years of war that we've experienced in this system. And you have a second in command who is an extremely capable person who has been consistently really steamrolled by what has become more or less a bureaucratic machine of yes men in a lot of ways. And it's like I'm just trying to get the emotional beats of that down right now, and give these characters some dimensionality. And the interesting thing there is you can feed that from just about any experience. And I think the thing there is it's kind of like superhero movies where it's like this is somebody with super strength and flight or an Iron Man suit, and like that's where they are at their peak, but the humanity revealed underneath that is a lot more. That's what makes you like that's why people love Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark. Like
Yeah.
Right.
he's a very relatable, snarky, funny, kind of cocky character. And that's but like and he seems like a dude that's got a power suit, you know, and
Right.
it's kind of the same thing with Delta Force. Like this is a weird tangent off that. Josh Brolin playing a Delta Force commander in Sicario. The thing is apparently he thought that role was too silly. He was like, this is ridiculous. There's no way that a dude would be like this. And then he spent the day with real Delta operators and was like, oh, I get it. Like these guys are khaki pants and open toed shoes and bullshit. Like, so which is really cool and really humanizing. And also he's kind of the dark side of the awesome characters of that film.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Actually, I think you kind of touched on a really interesting comparison there with that first Iron Man movie where you have Tony Stark versus Obadiah Stane. And in a lot of ways, before the plot of the movie, they're basically ultimately the same character. Mm-hmm. And if anything, the arc just starting with where they are at the beginning of the movie, Obadiah Stane just thinks of Tony Stark as this brilliant but entirely unstable genius who is going to just like cause more problems than he's going to solve, and is going to run the company into the ground. And it's the best for all parties involved if he's just gotten rid of.
Yeah, he thinks he's an entitled little prick. He says that like when he's in the suit and he's actually like enabled to think that he can say what he wants to say. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and they both end up in the power suit at the end. And in the sequel movie, we're actually kind of shown in a way that Obadiah Stane was right about everything about Tony Stark. He was an entitled prick. He was mentally unstable. He was not really good at like running a profitable company. It's just that he's so good at building stuff that they're even able to just corner that section of the market.
Yeah.
I think that's a kind of a cool thing that you can do with your noir character, where your noir character can change, but also doesn't have to give up what is the most like the classic one with a noir character is somebody who drinks too much or is an alcoholic. For your character, Josh, it sounds like it's a guy who can't fucking sleep
because he has nightmares about losing his family. So he takes upper drugs like meth and cocaine to stay awake. So he's been awake for days at a time when we meet him in the movie, and it takes place over a couple-day period. But eventually he sleeps and he kind of has his nightmares, and that's his catharsis of being reborn. Is kind of how we have it playing out. Then he can confront the final villain and do his thing.
That is a fucking great allegory for not dealing with your trauma. Like very truly. And like the not sleeping thing, it's kind of a low key, like it's been people don't think about that as much because normally in our culture it's alcohol, but people that just don't fucking sleep, like that's usually kind of thrown in as an afterthought or definitely as a term of PTSD, but it's never really shown as like the thing that's like affecting a character in a big way. So I love that.
And awesome. I think, thank you. Yeah, and actually it's really kind of brilliant in a way, because when you have the sleep deprivation, you can literally only stay awake for so long before you have to sleep. And like when you compare that to other like metaphors for putting off or not dealing with your issues, like alcohol or drugs, I mean, in theory, you could literally be on drugs for the rest of your life, or you could literally continue to drink for the rest of your life. But I think it's a much better allegory for not dealing with your issues, because no matter how far out you try to push your demons, you're going to have to deal with them eventually.
Exactly. Yep. And that's what we're going for with our little story. So I'm glad you guys are liking it. That's awesome.
That sounds cool as hell, especially because like just from a physiological and psychological standpoint, actually, just having dealt with a lot of friends of mine with PTSD, the symptoms mirror each other to sleep deprivation in a couple of ways. Like you're going to get more gaunt, you're going to have like you're going to be a lot more jumpy. Your brain, if you are trying to stay up, is actually going to be a lot more in that fight or flight response. I mean, hell, anybody who's been through like some extended overnight, maybe not specifically military training, but like anybody who's had to be up for days at a time. I mean, fuck, every programmer I know has experienced that, like that paranoia of not sleeping for days at a time, because they just like they either get lost in their work or they've got a deadline that they have to meet. And and throw a murder case on top of that, you're playing with some fire.
Yeah. And as like I've had insomnia for literally years, and like it gets to a point where if you're just not able to sleep, you're just not functioning on all cylinders. And like at first you don't even notice it at first, but it becomes, the more exhausted you are, just the more, once you finally do get some rest, just the immediate turn that you experience in that, it's just, for lack of a less cliche metaphor, night and day there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's so critical to the brain sleep that playing with that from a character standpoint is really allows us to do some fun things with making it a surrealist noir, which kind of sets it apart from other noirs. That's something we set down and to say, why is our story important to tell? You know, there's plenty of stories about hard-beaten detective solves a murder, so that's kind of our setting point, is that we have that whole trauma storyline and kind of dealing with your demons, like you guys said. So it's
well,
cool.
especially if you're going with that angle and it is surrealist and it does get more unhinged over time. Guillermo del Toro just came out with the trailer for Nightmare Alley, which is
I haven't seen it.
I'm a sucker for anything Guillermo del Toro. And this is like starring Bradley Cooper and Ron Perlman and it's like a bunch of the mainstays of Guillermo del Toro. But the book is is a fascinating noir in a way that I can't fully describe. So like I do highly recommend, but it's got some very much occult leanings, and it lines up with the tarot in a lot of ways. It's a very cool concept, and apparently this is something Guillermo del Toro has been wanting to make for a while. And like that's the cool thing about this is an allegory. This is like this guy isn't a cop. He doesn't have a whole police force to help him solve this murder. He doesn't have other people to rely on. It's just him. And that's the thing about a noir. You've got your classic femme fatales. You've got the partner that maybe dies. You've got a lot of people that character wise, a private eye could rely on, that are in some ways extensions of his vices and the bad things that he does, or they're like idealized versions of what he kind of aspires to be in all of his dimensions.
Well said. I agree. That's awesome. I gotta watch that trailer now. That's really cool.
It's it looks bonkers. I'm excited.
I love Guillermo del Toro. He's a genius.
Yeah. Nobody does otherworldly imagery and ventures into the uncanny quite as well as he does.
Somebody keep him and Neil Gaiman far apart.
Yes.
Because as much as I want to see that, the world would probably end. Like it would wake some people up, and you'd be in the pod in the Matrix, and you're like, fuck.
Oh no. Oh, that's awesome.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, guys, thank you for being on the podcast. Is there anything else you want to cover? It's been about half an hour. We got more time though if you guys want to keep going.
Let me see. Honestly, like I'm pretty good on this subject.
Sweet.
And I do have to boogie here in a minute. So
You're good. Well, thank you again, Carey DuVal and Will Shaw. Links to everyone's social medias down below the video. Thanks for watching Nerds with Friends. You guys are awesome.
heck yeah, appreciate it, man.
All right. See you guys.
Later.
Yeah, have a good one.
Yeah.